Hey everyone, I'm Spartan Bear, and this is my guide for getting started in Final Fantasy XIV. Now, while there are other resources out there for new players, including an official starter guide from Square Enix themselves, which I'll link in the description below, I thought I'd make a guide that covers some of the things that I think are important for new players to know, and that the game might not do the best job in bringing to their attention. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so let's start out with getting a character into the game. The first thing you're going to want to do is select which region and data center you want to play on. Now, unless you have a specific reason not to, like you're planning on playing with friends on their server, you'll want to select the region closest to where you are, just to improve your game's responsiveness. The regions are split into North America, Europe, Japan, and Oceania. That's for players in or around Australia. Within those regions are data centers. Think of these like collections of servers for that region, and within these are worlds, which are like individual servers. Your choice of data center doesn't matter unless you're planning on making a character on a specific world. Bear in mind when selecting that you can actually have your character travel to different worlds and even other data centers to play with other players, doing things like dungeons and raids and a lot of other kind of content, but there are some limitations. I'll leave a link in the description to what these limitations are, since some of these will deal with aspects that I'm not really going to cover in this video. Once you've selected your region and data center, it's time to make your character. So when it comes to selecting your character's race and gender, feel free to pick whichever you want. None of them have any bearing on your character's abilities within the game. The only things that I will point out is at the point of making this video, Hrothgar only have males available, but females are being developed for a release sometime in the future. The next thing that I'll mention is Hrothgar and both male and female Viera have some limited choices when it comes to hair and visibility of some of their head slot items. Some head slot items don't appear on the races at all just because of the way the game's coded along with the unique head shapes of those races. The devs are working on making more items visible, but it's something to bear in mind if you really like your character wearing hats. Once you've settled on your character's race and appearance, the next thing you'll be asked to do is take a look at your character's birthday and their patron deity. Again, these don't have any bearing on your character's abilities within the game, so feel free to pick whichever you like. There is a little blurb about each of the patron deities that you can have a look at, so just see whichever one you like the sound of and pick that. Finally, while there are some tiny stat differences between some of the races, the numbers are so close together that by the time you need to start caring about your actual stat spread, the differences are going to be negligible, so don't let that dissuade you from playing whichever race you like. So the next thing to select is your starting class. A thing to note at this point is that if you pick a class and you decide you don't like it or you want to try something else, you can absolutely do that. But for now, it's just worth noting that you can play every class and job on one single character, so don't feel pressured. So all classes and jobs are primarily split into three roles known as the Holy Trinity. You have the tank role, whose job it is to keep the enemy's attention and protect the party, the healer role, whose job it is to keep everybody alive through healing and mitigating damage, and finally we have the DPS role, whose main job it is to kill the enemy till it's dead. Something I'll mention here is that all roles are very approachable, so new players shouldn't be afraid of giving any of them a go. Tanking is basically just a case of turning on your tank stance and hitting things to keep aggro, and using defensive buffs every now and again to make the enemies hurt you less. Healing, depending on which healer you choose, is a matter of selecting a party member, casting either a heal to heal up after damage, or apply mitigation or shields before the damage goes out. You also have AoE heals and shields and regens to make life even easier. Finally, with DPS, it's just a simple matter of learning a basic rotation to optimize your damage output, and then keep hitting stuff until it dies, while, like the rest of the party, dodging enemy attacks. Bear in mind that what I've just said is a very basic description of what it is to do for those three roles, and high-level content does add more abilities, nuance, and challenge to the various jobs, and to the fights themselves, so keep that in mind. In the future, I'll be releasing a guide that gives more information about what the various methods of success and responsibilities for the various roles and jobs are, so keep an eye out for that. Something to note here is that the choice of starting class will also determine the city that you're going to start in. So, taking a look at our jobs in the Disciples of War, first we have the Gladiator. They occupy the tank role, they fight with a sword and shield, and can advance into the paladin job at level 30. Gladiators start in Uldar. Next, we have the pugilist. They occupy the DPS role, fight using fist weapons, can advance into the monk job at level 30. Pugilists also start in Uldar. Here we have the marauder, the second and final option for starting as a tank job. Marauders fight using a two-handed axe, and can advance into the warrior job at level 30. Marauders start their journey in Limsa Lominsa. Now we have the Lancer, another DPS. Lancers fight with a spear and can advance into the Dragoon job at level 30. Lancers start in Gridania. Next up we have the Archer, another DPS job that fights with, you guessed it, a bow. And can advance into a Bard from level 30. Archers start in Gridania. Moving to the Disciples of Magic, we have the Conjurer, our first and only healer to start the game with. They fight with a wand or cane, although later in the game they only use canes, and can advance into White Mages from level 30 and start off in Gridania. Our next class is the Thaumaturge. The Thaumaturge is a DPS class who casts spells using a scepter or staff, although like the White Mage, they exclusively use staves later on, and can advance into Black Mages at level 30. Thaumaturges begin in Uldar. Finally, we have the Arcanist. Arcanists are a DPS class whose weapon of choice is the Grimoire and their summoned carbuncle, and can advance into both Summoner or into another healer, the Scholar, at level 30. Arcanists start their journey in Limsa Lominsa. The final step of character creation is selecting your starting world. As I mentioned before, for the most part, unless you're planning on joining as a friend's free company, or just want to be on a particular world, your choice here doesn't really matter. In fact, you can form groups while on different worlds and even travel to other worlds using the world travel system, but we'll look at that in another video. The one thing that I will mention is that there is sometimes a little icon, like the one shown here, which indicates that this is a preferred world. What that means is that if you make a character on that world, you get a buff called Road to 80. This buff gives you bonus experience when you're doing various points of content and helps you level your character up a lot faster, just making it a little bit easier to get towards endgame without having to go and do too much in the way of side content. You can just focus on the main story and you should get plenty of experience to carry you through the game. Okay, now that we're in the game, we're going to start talking about setting up your UI and enabling some useful settings. A lot of this is going to come down to personal preference, but there are some things that I think are useful to know. I'm only going to cover the ones that I think are most useful, but feel free to play around with the settings to see which one you find comfortable. So, the first thing we're going to do is go into character configuration. Here, under the General tab, we have the cutscene skipping section. I typically turn this on since it's basically an option to stop you watching cutscenes from dungeons and trials and raids, and even travel ones once you've already seen them, so you've no danger of actually missing them. It just stops you from watching them over and over again if you end up running the dungeon multiple times. Next, over the target, filters and mouse tabs, most of these options here are fine set in their default settings, but if there's anything you want to look at or change, feel free to give it a try. In the character tab, the main part I want to talk about here are the battle effect settings. Now, in the game, there are a lot of really flashy and cool attacks, and for the most part, having the effects on is fine, especially when you can see all the cool attacks and abilities that you have, but in some fights, especially when there are a lot of people fighting an enemy together, the target can be lost under all these explosions of light and all these battle effects of everybody fighting it. You could just turn off everybody's battle effects, but then party members often have battle effects that it's useful to know, like a ninja with their Doton or a white mage with their asylum buff. So in these cases, what I tend to do is have the show limited option enabled for party members so that it shows the effects without overwhelming the screen with bright and flashy explosions. For the other section, I turn them off since I rarely need to see them. Next, on the UI settings overview, under the General, we can scroll down and set up whether we want various pop-ups to appear on screen, like the recommendation, play guide, and achievements. Over on the HUD tab, there are a number of settings that you can configure to your own liking. I typically advise leaving the default ones enabled, but also making sure that you have enabled the AOSIA time, local time, and server time. These will display in the top right hand corner on your clock. The Aoze time is really mostly useful for gatherers to keep track of when special gathering nodes or fish are available. There are other uses, but that's for another video as well. Finally, in the target section, I highly recommend you enable the option to display the target's remaining health as HP percentage. This is extremely useful for tracking phase changes in higher end content. Next up, we have the hotbar section. Here, you configure a lot of different sections for your hotbars, whether on keyboard and mouse or on controller. I'll leave a link in the description for a couple of useful video guides on setting up your hotbars, since there can be a lot to consider for optimizing, but to start off, you'll be fine with the default settings. The next thing we're going to look at is your HUD layout. Here, you can adjust the size and position of pretty much all of your screen's elements. Now again, a lot of this is going to come down to personal preference, so feel free to have a play around and see what works for you. Okay, now that we're all set up, we can get into the game. And there are a few things you want to keep an eye out for when going through at the beginning. The first things you want to keep an eye out for are quest icons like this one here, which tell us that this person has a quest that's part of the game's main story. Main scenario quests lead you through the story of Final Fantasy XIV and offer a lot of experience, unlock content, gear, and various rewards throughout the game. The next icon is this yellow one, which shows that this person has a side quest. These offer some experience and various rewards. The final quest icon we're going to look at is this blue one here with the plus sign on it. This tells us that the quest will unlock something within the game, whether that be extra dungeons, trials, raids, the ability to dye or glamour items, and equipment, or even new classes and jobs. So whenever possible, it's worth seeking these out actively and trying to complete them to unlock as much of the game as possible. The next thing that we're going to look at is the Aethernet. Within the main cities, there are these smaller aetherytes here that you can use to quickly teleport around the city once you've attuned to them. If you attune to all of the aetherytes in a city, you will unlock the ability to teleport to any of the city's exit points or to their airship landing. The last thing that I'm going to talk about with regards to being in your starting city is your starting class's guild hole. Now, the main scenario quest you'll do at the beginning of the game will lead you to your starting class's guild hole. Once you find it, you'll want to do the blue quest icon that's associated with it and any subsequent ones. Doing class and job quests for your character unlocks a number of things, such as the hunting log, which gives you targets to slay for some nice XP bumps, access to the armory chest, abilities for your class and job, and finally, the ability to swap to other classes and jobs when you unlock them. The last thing I'll talk about is something you'll encounter before doing your very first dungeon, while progressing through the main story of the game. This is called the Hall of the Novice, which will put you through several training exercises that'll differ depending on the role that you are when you do it. This is an extremely useful thing to explore, as it'll teach you the basics of things to look out for in various forms of content, such as dodging area of effect attacks, using area effect attacks yourself, targeting priorities, holding aggro for tanks, and healing. In exchange for doing these exercises, you'll gain some pieces of gear, which will likely be much better than the gear you currently have equipped, and after completing the final challenge, you'll get a ring which increases experience gains by 30% as long as you're level 30 or below, which is great for leveling alternative classes. And with that, you're ready for your first dungeon. Don't be afraid to say you're new or that you need advice. Most people in the game are really friendly and happy to help somebody in need. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and a comment. If you want to see more videos like this in the future, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. For now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.